Well, it's Sunday morning and my once-a-week housekeeper is here. She's upstairs cleaning my room, which should probably take her half of the day. So I have a little time, and I wanted to reminisce about what living in Chiang Mai was like more than 50 years ago. I first came to Chiang Mai as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1969. That's 54 years ago. Things were quite different back then. It was the 60s, and we were in America. America was in the Vietnam War, and I was opposed to the war. But I wanted to serve my country. So I applied for and joined the Peace Corps, and was invited to train to go to Thailand as an English teacher. We trained in Hilo, Hawaii, which was pretty lucky for us. We were the last group to train there. Hawaii is a wonderful place. After 3 months of language training and teacher training, we hopped on a 707 Pan Am flight number 1 from Honolulu to Bangkok. Back then you had Pan Am 1, which was the east to west around the world, and there's a Pan Am 2, which was the west to east around the world. I've taken both flights. Lucky me. But we landed in Bangkok after 17 hours, and I was ready to get off that airplane. So I was the first one at the door. And they opened the door, and it was like opening the door to an oven. Whoosh! And not only that, but it was durian season, so the smell of durian was all over. And I thought, my God, if it's this hot and this stinky, I'm going to stay on this plane and continue around the world. But the 90 people behind me pushed me out the door, and that was my first introduction to Thailand. After a couple of days, we took the night train from Bangkok to Chiang Mai, which was where I was going to be stationed in a boys' school there. I was the first American to teach at that school. There were no other ways to get to Chiang Mai at that time. It was only the overnight train because there were almost no flights. And the road from Chiang Mai to Bangkok was not completed yet. So we only had one way to get there, and that was the overnight train, which was wonderful back then. It was comfortable, it was a sleeper, and we had dinner in the dining car. Got to my site, met my headmaster, and was assigned some classes. My first class, went upstairs, walked into the room, and there were 50 students, 50 12 and 13-year-old students. Each class has a leader, and the leader said, "Satan up!" And 50 kids stood up at one time, and I thought they were going to attack me, so I was ready to run out the door. But then he said, "Goose morning, teacher." And I thought, oh my God, this is how it's done. Every day they're going to do this. So I said good morning to them. And my first lesson was to teach them how to say good morning instead of goose morning. I met some students the other day at a reunion. They're all 66, 67 years old now. I taught them when we were 12 and 13. And none of them spoke English. None of them could remember a thing I taught them, which was okay. The Peace Corps had a policy of, we wanted to teach English and we wanted to make friends. The first one we didn't do too well, but the second one we did pretty good. These, there were about 100 of them, 100 students at this reunion, all remembered me, all loved me, and I loved them. And I think that part of the Peace Corps policy, we were pretty successful. Back then, to get around Chiang Mai, there were almost no cars in the whole city. I knew everyone who owned a car in the city. The only way we could get around were these little Honda motorcycles and Samlaws, which were trishaws, the three-wheeled pedal bikes that got you around the city. So if we wanted to get around the city, we took the pedal bike. But we also had these little Hondas. I remember my first meeting with the Peace Corps director, and he said, well, there's one rule that we have, and the rule is no volunteers can own a motorcycle. It's too dangerous. And the second rule is, if you do buy a motorcycle, you have to wear a helmet. So I bought a Honda 50cc motorcycle and a helmet. And that's how I got around for the next couple of years. During my first couple of weeks in Chiang Mai, I caught dengue fever. That's something you don't ever want to get. It's also called breakbone fever. And it's very well named because I felt like every bone in my body had been broken by a baseball bat. I also had 104 fever and the worst headache I've ever had right behind my eyes. So I wound up at the hospital and I was treated. Went back to work, continued teaching, but I also had other physical problems. I had diarrhea for 9 months in a row. It's my fault. I ate at the night markets every night. And during those days, there was only one company in the whole country that bottled water. And I was making $70 a month at the time. So I wasn't about to spend money on bottled water. So we were supposed to boil our water before we drank it. Water now in Chiang Mai is treated, so it's pretty safe. I don't hear about people getting sick. And so we were supposed to boil our water, and I was too lazy. So I never boiled the water, and I drank it, and I was sick for 9 months in a row. And I think I got better for a couple of months and then got sick again. But that was life like back then. And I think I recovered. I made it. I don't get sick anymore. In fact, I live in a sort of a big garden here, and we don't get a lot of visitors, and I don't go out too much, so I don't get sick. I haven't had a cold in 15 years, and I never have diarrhea anymore. So things are a lot better than they used to be. I've got lots of stories of what life was like back then. Some not so suitable for mixed company, some okay. I'll talk about one time when we went up into the mountains. We used to go up into the mountains a lot to visit the hill tribes. Back then, the hill tribes were tribal. They weren't known by tourists, and even the Thais didn't know who they were. And they didn't sell their wares at the night market. They just lived their life. A lot of them planted opium. And back then, we had a bunch of DEA agents here trying to stop that from happening. One of the things that they did was they had crop replacement. Interestingly enough, one of the crop replacements was coffee. And at that time, I remember there was one coffee shop in Chiang Mai, and the name of it was very interesting, was called The First Coffee Shop. And it was the first coffee shop in Chiang Mai, and it was the only one. The Thai people weren't into coffee back then. They drank tea. Now, of course, there's a coffee shop on just about every corner. It almost looks like Seattle and Starbucks. But back then, coffee was a replacement for opium. And beans also. They had a lot of beans up there. So there used to be, I think the village is still there. They're a little above Doi Sutep Temple. There was a Hmong village. Back then they used to call them Mao, but that's not a good name for it. They call themselves Hmong. And they used to grow opium up there. And I used to travel up there and watch them, and I watched them harvest the opium, scraping the sap off of the bulbs there, and then boiling them down to opium, and then they'd ship them off somewhere to make heroin out of it. And so I went up there one day, and I ran into a DEA agent who I recognized, and they were looking at some bean fields, and the bean fields were where the opium used to grow, and there was a UN worker there, and I didn't like talking to the DEA agent, so I talked to the UN agent, and I said, wow, they really replaced all this whole big opium field with beans, huh? They'll probably lose a lot of money that way. And he said, oh, no, don't worry about it. They planted the opium field on the other side of the mountain. So that's what was happening back then. And we used to visit the villages, a lot of Hmong and Karen, Lisu and Lahu. I spent my honeymoon in a Lahu village with my new wife, who was a teacher at my school, and that was a wonderful experience because His Majesty the King flew in. It was New Year's Day, and he flew in to greet the villagers, and I was there to see that, and that was kind of cool. And we had lots of experiences back then that you don't have right now. A lot of the experiences people have are set up, they're tourist traps, which is okay. It's better than not having those experiences. But I just feel so lucky to have lived at the right time to experience some very interesting things in Thailand. So that's basically what we were doing back then. It was fun. It was a long time ago, but it's still imprinted in my memory. Thanks for listening.